Hello guys, and welcome to Let's Talk About.
My name's Liam.
And my name's Billy.
And on this podcast we have absolutely no limits whatsoever.
Genuinely, no topic is off limits for us.
We speak about ghosts, aliens, supernatural and much more.
We want to get you guys involved as much as possible with our podcast journey. Every Sunday we'll have a brand new episode, and we'll even let you guys decide on some of those episodes or what happens in them.
So far we've spoken about ghosts, aliens, zombies and even a talking mongoose.
Can't be the talking mongoose. Follow and subscribe to Let's Talk About.
Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about the Lady in White. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how is everyone doing tonight? I hope everyone is doing well. I am not doing well. I am on the verge of getting sick, or I am sick. It just hasn't gotten really bad yet, so I am trying to get this recorded as fast as I can, and hopefully I don't sound too bad. I had my niece and nephew again, and they were sick, and it was bound to happen. So I'm trying to get this recorded before I'm dying. I am not drinking anything tonight. I just have water because I need to take some NyQuil after this and crash out. I am wearing Friday the 13th. I actually have like a whole outfit, pajama pants and a t-shirt, and it has like 4 different pictures of Jason, and it says Friday the 13th, and then underneath it says Jason Voorhees, which I will post that. Let's get started on this. Hopefully I don't sound too bad. Today we are going to be talking about the Lady in White. There are so many versions of her, not just in the United States, but all over the world. The Lady in White is a kind of female ghost or apparition, normally a beautiful woman dressed or veiled in white. They are recurrent and are rooted deeply in many legends and folklore from many countries around the world, mostly in rural areas and wandering along lonely roads, and usually linked to tragedy or mourning a lost love. If you check your area, I'm sure you can find some version of a lady in white, either floating around the corridors of a manor or walking the edges of a cliff, sometimes wandering endlessly searching for their lost love, or seeking vengeance as a scorned lover. They are an international phenomenon, and there are countless stories, and not only ancient or old stories, but also current urban legends that circulate various towns. In some European countries, such as Germany and the Netherlands, they are considered gentle spirits. Some of the spirits of healers that have passed, others have become some of the earth spirits or elves, though they are all considered to have begun as human at some point. Up in Ireland and more northern countries, wailing women in white are said to be heralds of death. Some are famed because of their shrieking wail and called banshees. The name is linked to tumuli or mounds in the Irish countryside, which are known as she in Old Irish. The bitter cry is said to be more mournful than any sound on earth and could be an omen for death. Ireland's best known ghost story is The White Lady of Kinsale. In Charles Fort, built between 1677 and 1682, and in military use until 1922, located in Kinsale Harbor, the apparition is linked to the legend of a lady that committed suicide on her wedding night because her father shot her husband. She jumped to her death. Afterwards, her father, being driven by the guilt of murdering his son-in-law, also committed suicide. The ghost of the grief-stricken bride is still talked about in many ghost tours in the area today. In Mexico, La Llorona, which I did cover, make sure you go check that out for a more in-depth story on that, and so you can hear my dream that I had about her. So in Mexico, La Llorona, the wailer or weeping woman. Legend has it that a woman in white with dark hair drowned her children and wanders around crying out for her children and is often linked to water. The same legend is popular in Venezuela. She is called the Sayona, also a woman in white, that appears to unfaithful husbands, luring them into the forest, where she turns into a beast and eats them. In Japan, Yuri, or dark soul, are vengeful spirits trapped between the living and the dead. In Japan, if someone dies, certain rituals must be done in order to guide the spirit to the afterlife. But those who did not have a ceremony, died unnaturally, or left with unresolved matters may become a ghost. The most frequent representation of this Yuri is a woman wearing a white kimono with dark hair and no feet. Well, that's creepy. There are many types of Yuri in folklore, and they have different names. Some are not evil, like those mothers that return to care for their children. Others, like those linked and haunting certain spaces, tend to be more dangerous. In Pennsylvania, the White Lady of Pond Bank, also referred to as the White Witch, is said to haunt the forests and to leap onto cars. She is even said to be accompanied sometimes by a white dog. For the tragedy, when she encounters men, it is believed she enjoys instilling fear in them. In Dallas, Texas, at White Lake Park, it is reported that the ghost of a 20-year-old looking girl, known as the Lady of White Rock Lake, described as wearing a water-soaked 1930s evening dress, who usually appears at night along the roadside of East Lother Drive. Witnesses claim the phantom asked to be taken to her home on Gaston Avenue in Dallas before disappearing in the car during the ride and leaving behind a waterlogged car seat. Legend claims the woman to be a drowning victim from a boating accident. In the 1930s, reports of the ghostly encounters were published in Dallas area newspapers in the 1960s. So those are just little clips of other countries and their version of the White Lady, and then a couple from here in the United States. Now, I'm going to be reading, I think there's 3 of them. So I'm going to be reading 3 different encounters that I found on Reddit for the White Lady. So let's get started on that. So this happened to my friend 3 or 4 summers back. This is what he told me, including all of the details. He was depressed about his ex and was moping around and decided he wanted to go for a walk to get his mind off of things around 1 a.m. He is about a block or 2 from his neighborhood when he decides to take a shortcut through this townhouse neighborhood to avoid going beside a busy road with lots of cars. He says no one was outside and it was very quiet. As he cut in front of a house on the sidewalk, a figure starts to come into sight in front of the house by the doorstep. He says it looked like a little girl playing on the ground. She was dressed in white and had very pale skin. He said what took him by surprise is how bright she looked in the dark, almost glowing, but not quite. As he moved past her to continue the shortcut, she stood up and he said she began to look like an old lady. Her face seemed to change age. She was looking at him as he was walking away from the house, and at this point he saw, and I quote, a black thing around her like a ball or cloud, end quote. She was absolutely still and just looked at him as he was walking out of the neighborhood from a distance. He was extremely scared at this point, but started to calm down when an ordinary man, or maybe it was just a random car, I don't remember, was passing by as he was leaving. He saw something fly above the ground by his face and fly upwards. He wasn't sure what it was, so he went on. He went home and immediately woke up his mom and brother and told them. I was not friends with him at this time, so he didn't bring up this story until I met him. But here's the crazy part. I decided to Google ghost stories around the area where I live and came across someone who had an almost identical experience in the same area. Detail for detail, from the black object to the way the lady looked young and then old from different angles. The fact she was on the ground, looking like she was playing before standing up, the color of her skin and clothing, and an object flying up from the ground. I believe the times of the night were different, though. Of course, I thought this was just my friend playing a joke, or maybe him posting the story online himself. But when I asked him about it and showed it to him, he turned pale and looked terrified. He looked like he wanted to cry. Mind you, this was an 18-year-old guy at the time. He swore it wasn't him that posted the story. The reasons I believe him are: 1, the story was matched perfectly, detail for detail, aside from some minor changes that suggest that the person was somewhere else but near the area in general. 2, the look on his face looked genuinely freaked out. He was on the verge of tears. And 3, his English at the time, and now, sort of, was very poor, and his sentences aren't anywhere near as structured and complete as the person's who wrote the story. He's a Spanish speaker, and back then it was difficult to really read his writing without stumbling over all the mistakes. The story was posted not too long, maybe several months, I think. I'll ask him when exactly it happened. He said it was before the date of the post, after this happened to him. Now, fast forward to last night. I am at my cousin's house, sleeping over, and we start talking about paranormal experiences, including my own. Mine are unrelated to this, though. So he begins to tell me a story about his friend. Keep in mind, I had not yet told him anything about the story about my friend above. His friend was walking around at night, high, at about 3 or 4 a.m. He sees a lady dressed in white, on her knees, praying at the doorstep of one of the houses in the neighborhood. He couldn't really make out a face and just ran his ass away when he saw it. My cousin tells me that at first his friend thinks he's just high and seeing things, but sometime later, his friend's sister sees the same lady in the same spot while she's driving home sometime later. I continue to ask my cousin where this occurred exactly, and of course, it happened in the exact same neighborhood that it happened to my friend. He goes on to call it the ghost of Haymarket. Haymarket is a small city right outside of Gainesville, Virginia, where we all live. At first, I think that my cousin's friend is actually the person that anonymously posted in the link I posted above. However, that person does not mention anything about their sister seeing the same thing. Me and my friend are both freaked out because it's pretty clear to me that there is a woman dressed in white praying at night in that neighborhood, either around or after midnight. I am starting to think that it is just some crazy real lady that is creeping everyone out, not some ghost. I'm tempted to casually go ask around in the neighborhood someday, but I'm afraid that I might not even be ready to hear more stories. Thankfully, the ghost seems harmless. I know a lot of you will not believe this, and I don't expect you to. But for those that do, or maybe live around the area, maybe you could provide any sort of insight on this stuff. Okay, so this next one actually happened in Ireland, so I thought that was pretty cool. I just thought I'd post my own experience with a woman in white. Although I live in Ireland, one of the posters mentioned that there is women in white all over the world, which is why I thought I'd share. It was 25 years ago, but it haunts me so much to this day. I was 12 and lived in a quiet country village in the west of Ireland. One hot summer, me and a dozen or so local kids and teenagers went to a lake outside the village. We cut through some fields to get there. It was quite a remote spot. As we were playing at the water's edge, I glanced to my left. I saw a woman standing on the water there. It was about 20 yards away from me. The water there, as we discovered afterwards, was about 3 or 4 feet deep. The woman was dressed in an all-white robe, which covered her hair too. It was really white, not necessarily glowing, as it was a bright day anyways. At once her appearance reminded me of images of Mother Teresa I would have seen on TV. It was too far away for me to make out facial features, but the curious thing is that she had some sort of cloth raised to her face. It was either wiping tears or mopping sweat. I looked on in shock and puzzlement for a few seconds, and then looked away because my mind couldn't actually accept what I was seeing. When I looked back a few seconds later, she was gone. For a while, I was too shaken to mention it to anyone there, but after a while I did. Nobody had seen anything at all, except for one older girl. We compared notes and were able to finish each other's sentences in relation to her appearance. I have never heard of anyone, anywhere, seeing anything like this. It has haunted me ever since, as mentioned, and I think about it all the time. Many people I have told have suggested it could be the banshee, an Irish fairy who takes the form of an old hag, and who appears often wailing before someone dies. Folklore says that if you see or hear the banshee, someone in your family will die soon, and many, many Irish people claim to have seen or heard her, but nobody in my family died that year, although the other girl's grandmother did die later in the year. I've been back to the area in recent years for a look, and everything looks smaller. It's now a very dreary place, especially in the winter. I wonder who she was. Okay, so this is the third one. It's called The Weeping Woman in White, and this happened in France. So this happened like 10 years ago. I was 14 or 15 at the time. I live in France, in a region or state called Les Vosges. It's a small mountain countryside of France on the northeast near Germany. I was with my cousin on this day. We are the same age, and when we were kids, we did everything together. And that day, there was this big bike competition in my town, like a World Cup for downhill biking. That was the pride of the town during these years. The streets were full, lots of people came from everywhere to see the race, and there were entrances at many spots to go to the center and along the racetrack. But my cousin and I didn't want to spend any money to enter. It was too expensive for a teenager. So we had this idea to cut through the forest from my parents' house, which was a little uphill on a mountain, and the track of the race was on the same height. We just had to cross this forest on the side of the mountain to arrive along the track and avoid the entrances. I forgot to mention, it was raining like hell this day, like really strong rain. So we went to walk in this shitty forest, really dense, trees and mud everywhere, all soaking wet. We struggled in this for like 30 minutes, and when we finally came to a clear meadow with a house and a dirt road uphill, and a second road even more uphill, parallel with a lot of people we could see going back and forth. My cousin and I thought that there was an entrance or a checkpoint there because we could hear the speaker from the race. So we decided to take the first dirt road near us where there was nobody, absolutely nobody, but like in a weird way because hundreds of people were there uphill about 100 meters from us on the other road. So the dirt road, we thought there was a little woods and then the racetrack would be there in a few meters. But it kept making turns. And at the end of a turn, there was this pile of tree logs, like 6 or 7 stacked on the side. And I swear there was this woman. Me and my cousin saw her at the same time, and we just froze from fear. With goosebumps all over my body, I'll say again that it was raining so much and a bit foggy, adding even more creepiness. We didn't say anything, but just turned back together to try not to look at her. As we said, "You want to take the other road?" "Yeah." So we made our way back and reached the second road with people and saw the race. But we had this woman in our minds and we're still in shock. I tried to forget her, convincing myself that she was just a spectator and she had got dumped that day or was drunk. My cousin and I never spoke about it again, thinking he also forgot. Until one day, maybe 4 or 5 years later, we were both at a party in a friend's house. There was a few of us left, and it was like 5 in the morning, gathered around a campfire in his garden, talking about stuff. And my friend's stepfather, I don't remember why he was there, started talking about a ghost story that happened to him in a cabin in the forest. So it reminded me of the story of the woman that I just told you about. And I told it to my friends and the stepdad. When I finished, my cousin looked at me angry and said, I thought you would never talk about that again. To this day, it still left a mark on us. So that is some little stories about the lady in white and some Reddit stories of encounters with her from France, Ireland, and the United States. Let me know what y'all think. Let me know if any of y'all have had any encounters with the lady in white. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the deadpodcast1 at gmail.com or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.